All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the League Express podcast. My name's Jake Kearnan, and joining me as always is the editor of League Express, Martyn Sadler. And Martyn, there was a lot of action over the weekend, a lot of big scorelines, you might say.
Yes.
What did you make of it all?
Well, it was in Super League, amazingly one-sided until we got to the very last game, which was Catalans versus London Broncos, which ended up at 12 points to 8, and the Broncos could easily have won that game. You know, they've really come on strong towards the end of the year, or the end of the season. But the other games were all disappointingly one-sided, I'm afraid, Jake. And, it began on Friday night, didn't it, with Wigan and Leeds. I thought Leeds, having put all those points on Hull a week or so earlier, I thought they'd put up a real strong performance at Wigan, but they actually got blasted out of sight, really, didn't they?
No, absolutely, mate. And we'll start with the Wigan-Leeds game.
Yeah.
Obviously, 38-0. As you touched on there, Leeds had that great game the week before. It's not often you see a team score so many points and then get nilled the next week.
No, and it's obviously immensely disappointing for their coach, Brad Arthur, who must have thought that perhaps they were building up momentum with a charge that might take them into the top 6. As it now stands, they have to win at Hull KR on Friday night while hoping that Leigh lose at home to St Helens if they're going to get into the top 6, which looks a very difficult task for them. So, but Leeds, they're flattered to deceive at times this season, and it seems that they beat Hull because Hull were so disastrously weak, doesn't it? And you despair for them a little. Wigan, though, just seem to be cruising as far as I can see. They've got all their star players back. Bevan French, obviously Jaifield, and Liam Marshall doing well. I think he scored his 150th career try, or was it Super League try at the weekend? Let me just 150th try for Wigan Warriors. Liam Marshall scored. Outstanding winger in the England squad for the Test series against Samoa this year, which I think is very well deserved, on his part. Top of the try scoring lists. So what could be better? Wigan are going to take some beating. I mean, they just put away Hull KR the previous week, and Hull KR seem to be the club that will really challenge them. And if those two get to the grand final, what a great game it's going to be. But there's a lot of bridges to cross before that happens, of course.
Yeah, it seems like they're just starting to fire. Obviously, you mentioned they've got Bevan French now, who doesn't seem to have missed a step since his return. He's scoring tries all over the park.
Absolutely.
And yeah, Liam Marshall, he just keeps scoring tries, doesn't he? He's one of the most consistent wingers in the competition, I reckon.
He's now scored 25 Super League tries this year, 5 ahead of Matty Ashton of Warrington. So, he's clearly going to be the top scorer in Super League of tries. And, what a player, not a big winger, which is fashionable in the modern game to have tall wingers who can catch, those big high kicks that come in their direction. But terrific speed, great footwork near the line. If he gets the ball 10 metres out, his footwork is so brilliant that he's normally going to score, despite who might be in front of him. So outstanding. And as I say, Wigan are just looking, I think, probably everybody's favourite bet for the title this year.
He reminds me a lot of like Hazem El Mesri, that sort of player. Small winger, just always has a knack for finding his way to the line.
Absolutely,
and, they're going to be a bit of a threat, I guess, going into the playoffs. And you might say it's surprising, not surprising, but they're probably in the front seat for the League Leaders' Shield, you might argue. But to think that they sort of had a bit of a dull period over the last couple of months with their injuries.
They did,
and to still be at the top of the ladder after that sort of dull period, a huge achievement.
Bevan French scoring 2 tries, at the first and the last try for well, not the first try, the second try and the last try for Wigan. Jake Wardle's playing very well as well. As I say, Jai Field's back at full back. Cade Ellis had a really great game for Wigan as well on Friday night. I thought he was absolutely outstanding. So, as I say, things are going well for Wigan. They've got most of their players on the field, of course, apart from Brad O'Neill and Willie Isa, who are long-term injuries. But they seem to be coping fine. Tom Forber stepping in at dummy half for Brad O'Neill, no problem.
Yeah, definitely. All right, we'll move on to the other contender for the League Leaders' Shield, Hull KR. They defeated Leigh 24 points to 0. A bigger scoreline than I guess both you and I were expecting, Martyn.
Well, I thought Leigh might win that game, if I'm really honest about it. I think I said so in last week's podcast. So I'm on the record, and I'm on the record obviously as a pretty bad judge, to be honest, Jake, because Hull KR completely dominated the game. Obviously nilling their opponents was an incredible achievement, given how Leigh have played at home in the second half of the season. Mikey Lewis scoring 2 tries, getting 3 points in the Albert Goldthorpe Medal. We'll probably come to that a bit later. And, Adrian Lamb, very, very disappointed after the game. Leigh didn't fire at all, but then they weren't allowed to by Hull KR. But a massive problem for Hull KR, because they've had Elliot Minchella suspended for 2 games for a high tackle on Matt Moylan. Now, they've got until 12 o'clock today. It's Tuesday today. They've got till 12 o'clock to decide whether to appeal. I'm sure they will do. So that by the time people are listening to this podcast, that too much suspension may or may not still be in place, depending on the way the appeal goes, assuming that there is one. So, we'll see. But that would be a real blow to Hull KR, because he's been an inspiring captain this year, and they'd miss him for the final game of the season, the regular season, and the first game of the playoffs. And that would be quite a significant blow.
Absolutely. And just watching that matchup, seemed like Matt Moylan was having a lot of trouble with some of their high balls. They were putting a lot of pressure on him. I know Ryan Hall sort of scored a try and was putting all that pressure on Matt Moylan. And I just think if they're going to continue to play Matt Moylan at fullback, Leigh, maybe other teams are watching that matchup and thought that could be a potential weakness.
I think Matt Moylan's better at standoff, personally, for that sort of reason that you've just outlined. And I would imagine that Adrian Lamb might have a bit of a rethink on that, putting Gareth O'Brien at full-back and Matt at stand-off. That would seem a better solution to me.
Absolutely. And, big matchup for them this weekend against the Saints, but we'll get into that a little bit later. In the other matchup on Friday night, St Helens defeated Castleford 40 points to 4.
Yes, very probably Tommy Makinson's last game at St Helens. It was good to see him back in the team after suspension, but he only scored 1 try out of the I think it was 8 tries that St Helens scored. But the other winger, young John Bennison, he got 3. Great performance by him. Looks to be cementing his place in the St Helens side, and he's not been a absolute certain pick for much of this season, isn't John Bennison? But he's obviously a very, very good player, and I think he's got a great future at the club. So, but an easy win for St Helens. Several of their top players coming back into the side, and I think they look now to me to be safe in the top 6, because although they're only 2 points in front of Leeds and Catalans, they've got a 214 points difference, whereas Leeds have only got 52 and Catalans have got 27. So, they could afford to lose against Leigh on Friday night, and even if Leeds and Catalans win, they'll still be in the top 6.
Yeah, and they sort of had a bit of a celebration at the end of the match, saying goodbye to a few departing players. I think Sione Matautia might be departing as well.
Yes, of course.
He's just been such a great, consistent player for them for quite a while now.
Still only 28 years old as well.
Yeah.
He's just coming to the peak of his career, really. So I don't know. Is he going to join an NRL club? I would have thought he would do, but
I thought I read reports that he was looking to return to Australia. So.
Yeah. Well, I think he is. But I'm not quite sure what his future is. But he certainly. He appears to be far too young to retire. So hopefully he'll carry on playing for someone.
So I remember when he debuted, he was like the hottest product coming through. He debuted for Australia at 18.
He did, yes.
I think he was one of the youngest to debut. He was
but his Australian career never kicked on, did it?
No. But and then obviously his brothers as well. So we'll have to stay tuned to see what his movements are. I'd love to see him back in the NRL. But we move on to Saturday's matchups. We had Salford defeating Hull FC 58 points to 4.
Well, that was just too easy. As so many games, against Hull are at the moment. Salford absolutely dominated. Tim Lafai got three tries. Mark Sneed kicked 9 out of 10 goals and just sort of dominated the game from half back and so on. And Hull just looked completely out of it. It's incredibly sad what's happened to Hull this year. And they've put out a statement on Sunday night, more or less saying, that this isn't who we are. But it is who they are at the moment. They're playing awful rugby. They just seem to be disjointed, no real obvious leadership in the team. Lots of young players playing for them, but, I just wonder whether the confidence is being knocked out of those players at the moment. They're putting too many young players in. They've let so many players go this year, and it's quite amazing how many of those players who they've let go seem to be playing better elsewhere. That's really strange, isn't it? And you sort of think, will there be any better next year? And they obviously have to be. I mean, at the moment, Hull are at the bottom of the league. They're down at the bottom with 6 points, below London Broncos. Their points difference is one greater, or one less, I should say, than London Broncos. They've got a minus 546. London Broncos is minus 545. So this weekend, it's an interesting subplot, isn't it, to the fixtures? Who's going to finish bottom? Yeah,
no, that's right. And there'll be a lot of tension on that sort of race at the bottom of the ladder. But
absolutely.
I wonder if Hull now, sitting at the bottom of the ladder as it stands, are sort of thinking to themselves, maybe we shouldn't have let go of all those players. They were quite quick to pull the trigger on a few of those boys.
Well, I mean, to give you an example, Franklin Pele, who they signed as a prop forward, had never quite looked fit enough when he was at Hull. They let him go fairly early on to Bradford Bulls, and he's been absolutely terrorising defences in the Championship.
Wow.
He looks a lot fitter now. He just looks, far sharper than he did when he was at Hull. And, Hull could do with him. I would say, or could have done with him in the latter part of the season. Tex Hoy has played very well for Castleford. They let New Brown go. Well, Brown played last year for New Zealand, when New Zealand beat Australia 30-0. So to say that he wasn't good enough to play for Hull, assuming that's why they let him go. I mean, I assume he probably wanted to go because he could see that the club wasn't achieving anything. But so who knows who instigated that departure? But nonetheless, they've let some really good players go, and it's weakened the squad considerably. Young Jack Brown, letting him go to Hull KR, a young prop forward who, was such a promising player a year or two ago. It just seems all over the place at Hull.
And I wonder if Leigh owner Derek Beaumont will go through with his calls to take legal action if Hull FC finish bottom.
Well, I mean, it's mention Hull FC to Derek, and it's a bit of a red rag to a bull, isn't it? Because obviously they've signed a lot of Leigh players for next year, but I'm not sure that will help them all that much, if I'm really honest about it.
Yeah, and I guess one of the criticisms has been that the club is too busy focusing on next year rather than this season. Richie Myler sort of shut down those allegations. Do you believe him?
Well, I mean, you can't. You've got the most important game that any club plays is always the next game, and you can't look too far ahead. You can only look ahead to what's going to happen at the weekend. And this weekend, Hull play Catalans. So for Hull FC, the Catalans game is what really should be concerning them. And in particular, their battle not to finish bottom.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that a bit later anyway.
Yeah, definitely. And then we'll move on to the next matchup. We had Warrington defeating Huddersfield 66 points to 0. Well,
again, Huddersfield had a very young team, a lot of injuries. They, Luke Robinson, who's recently been appointed as the the coach for the rest of this season and next, said that they only had about 17 fit players, and it was just a walk in the park for Warrington, and it's a real shame, isn't it, that we've got so many weak teams at the moment in Super League. Matty Ashton scored a hat trick, and it was all too easy, and it must have been a very difficult watch for any Huddersfield Giants fan, assuming that there are still some who are going to watch them, really, because they need to rebuild that club very urgently.
Yeah, and potentially a good opportunity for Warrington to sort of get some momentum heading into the playoffs.
Well, maybe, but they need to get momentum playing against stronger sides. It's great running up 66 points, but as Leeds found when they beat Hull by a similar scoreline a week earlier, that counts for nothing when you go to Wigan the following week. And of course, Warrington are playing London this week, so that threatens not to be a very tight game either.
Yeah,
it's not an ideal way to end the regular season.
Now, you'd probably almost rather be in like Leigh's position where you're versing Saints this week, and you want a good
everything's
tough
at stake.
Yeah. And the final matchup of the weekend, which also happens to be the closest match of the weekend, we had Catalans defeating London 12-8.
Yes,
London had an 8-point head start on them.
They did 6-0 at half time. They were winning. Leigh Kershaw had a very good game. A winger who I rate very highly, and but they couldn't quite hold on to get the result, and it means that Catalans, even though they're not playing well, they're still in with a chance, as I say, of getting into the top 6 by the back door almost. So. We'll see whether that happens, but as I've said to you many times before, I've been so impressed by London's spirit and togetherness in the latter part of the season, and I think they could have got more wins than they have. I mean, for example, if we didn't have the golden point rule, they'd have 2 more points anyway, because those 2 golden point defeats against Leeds. If those 2 games had been allowed to be draws, then they'd now be on 8 points, and quite possibly secure in 11th spot, not 12th.
Yeah, and is it just something like now 1 point separating them?
Yes,
and
1 point
differential.
1 points difference. So it is, and as I say, that's what's going to make it quite interesting to see how they do and how Hull do it this weekend.
Yes, it'll be very exciting. I think I'm heading to the Warrington-London matchup, so
right.
I'm eager to see that. Hopefully they put in a great performance.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
But yes, all right, mate, we'll have a look at the Albert Goldthorpe medal tally. A little bit of movement in the top 3 this week. Well, not so much movement, but there were points given out. Mark Sneed still sits on 29 points, but Mikey Lewis got 3 points at second place.
Yes, if Mikey Lewis gets 3 points this weekend against Leeds and Sneedy doesn't get any, then he wins the... he comes at the top of the table. So that's really quite interesting. Mark Sneed has been at the top of it for virtually the whole season. And, Salford, he's the main reason why Salford are in 4th place in the table. Not the only reason. There's been a lot of very good players for Salford this year, but he's been outstanding. So could he be just caught on the tape? Who knows? Yeah,
we'll soon see. George Williams sitting in 3rd place. He got 3 points over the weekend.
Yes.
He's on 24. Bevan French has slowly made a bit of a comeback after his few weeks off with injury. But
well, the trouble with this sort of... it's quite interesting, isn't it? We've always emulated the Dally M medal. with the Albert Goldthorpe Medal in the sense that we award points week by week for players' performances. And of course that disadvantages players who spend a few weeks out with injury, because there might be great players like Bevan French is, but if he's out injured he can't be picking up points. And in their wisdom, the Man of Steel people decided to adopt in exactly the same system that we have. And so the chances are that Bevan French, who probably is the outstanding player in Super League at the moment, but he won't win the Man of Steel award for the same reason, that he's missed too many games. And I think I really felt quite annoyed when the Man of Steel process changed. A, because they were copying us and they didn't acknowledge it, but B, because I think the Man of Steel should be determined by a panel of experts who decide who the best player is in the whole competition, not in terms of points picked up every week, but just in terms of making a judgment on who has been the top player in the year. And I think that's what it used to be, and that's what I think it should still be. And one of the problems with this system is that you find now it's very rare that forwards win it, because of course the outstanding players are nearly always the halfbacks or the hookers, who get most of the points. So that's fine as far as we're concerned, but for the Man of Steel, I don't think it should be the same system.
Yeah, because just doing the eye test, there's a number of players you could say are the best player in the league, but perhaps aren't getting that acknowledgement every week due to games off and suspensions and the like.
No, that's right.
All right, mate. So we've sort of gone through it a little bit, but as it stands, if we could just do a quick wrap on who needs to win to secure playoff positioning this weekend, what the crucial matchups are.
Well, we can start with Leigh and St Helens, can't we? Because Leigh need to win to be certain of finishing in the top 6, and if they do win, then they will finish in the top 6. If St Helens win, then they may well finish 4th, because Salford go to Wigan on Thursday, and most people would think that Wigan would win that game. So if they do, and St Helens beat Leigh on Friday, then Saints will finish 4th and Salford will finish 5th. But if Leigh win, as I say, they will then finish 5th and Saints will be 6th, and Leeds and Catalans will effectively not be able to get into the 6th. If St Helens win, though, then Leeds and Catalans both have a chance of winning and getting into the 6th. If Leeds win at Hull KR on Friday night and Leigh lose to Saints, then Leeds will finish 6th and Leigh will be out. And similarly, if Leeds lose to Hull KR but Catalans win against Hull on Saturday and Leigh have lost, then Catalans will be 6th. So it's quite an interesting challenge. The other interesting battle, well, it's the battle for the League Leaders' Shield. If Wigan beat Salford on Thursday night, they will win it.
Yep.
If Salford win, then Hull KR only have to beat Leeds on Friday and they will win the League Leaders' Shield. But also, if let's imagine that Hull KR lose to Leeds on Friday, then Warrington could sneak into second place. At the moment, they've got a 16-point worse points difference than Hull KR. But if Hull KR lose and Warrington can close that gap and overtake it, and don't forget they play London, so there's a good chance of them running up a decent score, then they would finish second and Hull KR would finish third. So that's really quite an interesting one, isn't it?
Yeah, a lot to play for, and those top 2 positions are so important for that week off.
But here's another interesting thought as well. I don't know if anybody else has thought of this, but Hull KR have now had Elliot Minchella banned for 2 games. Let's assume that the ban stays. We've said earlier we don't know whether it will or not. Now, what that would mean is that he will miss this Friday's game against Leeds, but he will also miss their first game in the in the playoffs. Now, if Hull KR finish second, that means they won't have a game until, the week before Old Trafford. It would almost suit Hull KR if Minchella is out to finish third. Because if they finish third, they would then play the sixth team in the opening week of the playoffs, and that would count as a game for Minchella to miss. So it'd be back for the last, for the major semi-finals and then the grand final. So that's an interesting dilemma in a way. There's almost an incentive for Hull KR to not beat Leeds.
Is there a way... Can they take advantage of that loophole where they could potentially list him in the reserve side?
No, because I think we've already had the reserves grand final, so there isn't a reserves game that they could play him in. I mean, the ridiculous thing is that, quite frankly, that blank week, if they do get a blank week by finishing first or second, that blank week in my view, ought to count in his suspension, because he would otherwise be playing in a game if they weren't achieving that position in the league. But it's an unfortunate dilemma really for them. But with a bit of luck, if they do put an appeal in and he gets it reduced to one game or completely, the suspension completely overturned, then it won't be a problem. But it's an interesting one for them.
I'm trying to think in the NRL whether suspensions count for bye weeks in the regular season.
Well, it'd be interesting to know, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure, to be honest with you. But I agree with you. I think if your team has a bye or they're good enough to get a week off in the playoffs, that should count.
It should count. Yeah, of course it should.
All right, mate. Now, there was some an announcement over the last week or so of some new inductees into the RFL Hall of Fame, and we also have a team being inducted. What can you tell us about this one?
Well, it was the Lionesses, wasn't it? From the Great Britain Lionesses, who toured in 1996, which was a period before many people were aware of women's rugby league. Really, to be honest, its profile has improved dramatically since then, and partly its profile has improved because of that sort of success that team had from back from 1996. There's a great photograph, by the way, of that team in League Express on page 3 this year, and I hope some of the women who are in that photograph have seen it and buy a copy to sort of put on the wall, because they all look great to start with. They're all smiling very beautifully, and it's just great to see. And it's amazing, really, that it's the first time a team has been put into the Hall of Fame, and it's an interesting idea, isn't it? Because after all, rugby league is a team game, and why shouldn't teams, as opposed to individuals, be put into the Hall of Fame? Absolutely terrific, really. So, good luck to them, and no doubt other teams might follow. The men might get a look in eventually.
Yeah. I'm just thinking of, all the great teams. We always have that debate, who is the greatest, club team of all time.
Oh, gosh,
a lot of people in the NRL are debating whether the Panthers are the greatest currently constructed
or St
team.
George from the 50s and 60s.
That's right. Yeah. So, who knows, if we can keep picking up silverware, they might even be in the discussion in the future for this sort of period.
Yeah.
The
St Helens team that won 4 grand finals in a row.
That's right.
That's a pretty good one, isn't it?
Yeah, it might be a movement. Going forward, we might see a few more teams going in.
Oh yes. And Jamie Peacock's in the, the great Jamie Peacock, who has an incredible record as a player. Paul Sculthorpe as well. Absolutely, again, an incredible record. And then two women, Jane Banks and Michelle Land, and then 2 players from way back, James Lomas, who played in the early years of the 19th century, and Alan Prescott, who captained Great Britain in that famous 1958 test in Brisbane, when he broke his arm and in the first few minutes of the game and refused to come off and carried on with it, and eventually led Great Britain to victory.
Wow, just another level of toughness, isn't it?
God. I don't think we see toughness like that these days, if I'm honest about it. In those days, people were made of granite, weren't they?
I don't think you'd be getting a half-time needle back in those days. I don't imagine they'd have them on supply.
No.
Unlike today. Yeah, mate. In terms of some sort of player movements and rumours, there's been reports that Canberra Raiders have come knocking on Warrington's door. They're hoping to pick up the services of Danny Walker, but I've been told that
Warrington have said get lost.
No,
yeah, Warrington have said go away.
Fair
enough. He's under contract to us, and I think Danny Walker may well end up in the NRL at some stage, but probably playing for South Sydney when Sam Burgess coaches South Sydney. I would guess.
Yeah.
But yes, and it's fairly obvious that quite a lot of NRL clubs are going to be looking to English clubs to recruit players. I mean, they've already recruited Matty Nicholson from Warrington, haven't they? So they'll keep coming back for more.
And again, we've touched on this a few times. Who is Ricky Stewart's scout over here? Who's the one that's saying, "Hey, Ricky, you've got to get a look at this lad"? Or maybe Ricky's just staying up in the early hours of the morning watching a lot of Super League.
Yeah.
In other signing news, Hull FC, they've landed 2 players from Australia. They've got Jordan Rapana signing with them. Obviously, he's represented New Zealand and still playing really good rugby at the moment.
35 years old, 2-year contract. Gosh, that's a leap of faith, isn't it?
And Aiden Sezer as well. He's going to make his return to Super League.
Again, well into his 30s. Played for Huddersfield and Leeds, then went back to West Tigers, coming back now to Hull FC. I mean, obviously, they do need some experience at Hull, and hopefully those 2 players will provide it. But Jordan Rapana got a terrible facial injury in the last game of I think it was the last game of the regular season for Canberra, and his face looked a real bad injury, and obviously, hopefully, he will have recovered by the time he comes over here. But gosh, it looked a bad one.
Yeah, I wonder where they'll plan to play him. Obviously, he's played a lot of wing. He's played a lot of fullback as well, and does a great job filling in when
he's a very good player. Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how he goes. Other news: John Bateman, he will return to the Tigers next season.
Even though the Tigers don't really want him.
Yes.
Yeah, isn't that a weird situation?
Yeah, very weird.
I mean, Shane Richardson came over here trying to persuade English clubs to sign John, and John obviously doesn't want to be in that position. He's got two more years left on his West Tigers contract, and he's determined to see it out. So, very strange situation, I think, that one.
Yeah, I haven't really seen anything like it. Like, obviously, we have loans and that sort of thing, but I guess Tigers didn't really have much to play for this season. So
no,
yes.
But I wonder whether John gets on with Benji Marshall. Who knows? It's that's an interesting situation next year.
I wonder how long they're willing to give Benji Marshall to turn this Tigers side around. Obviously, first year as a coach. Maybe 3 years.
Well,
I
hope they give him plenty of time. But they need to get off the bottom next year, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. In other news, mate, Jermaine McGillvary is set to retire after a very long season.
Had a great career, Jermaine McGillvary. He was our Rookie of the Year in 2011. And, well deserved. Great. What a great career.
Yeah.
And, he retires with our very best wishes, of course. But he might actually, playing for Wakefield at the moment, hopefully his career will end with a grand final victory in the Championship.
Yeah, it'd be a great way to go out, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
In other news, Luke Gale, he's been awarded a testimonial match. Probably well deserved as well.
Long career, I'm sure. Yeah, hopefully that'll go well for him. And he'll be on the Wakefield coaching staff, I think, coaching their academy side from next year.
Yeah, great. No, I'm sure he'll do a good job of that. You can just tell with some players that they're destined to go into coaching.
Very knowledgeable, very smart as well.
In some stadium news, mate, Hull KR, they've announced that they're looking to do a 1,000-seat extension on their stadium following the big increase of crowds this season. Probably much needed for them.
Absolutely. Well, if you look at their east stand, it doesn't go the full length of the pitch, does it? So I assume they're going to fill in that gap with that stand extension, and hopefully it'll be ready for the start of next season.
Yeah, it'll be bursting at the seams if they can get into the grand final and win this year.
Yeah,
it'd be great to see. But mate, we also had some NRL finals action over the weekend. We had Panthers defeating Roosters 30 points to 10. What did you make of this one?
Well, they scored about 4 tries early on, didn't they, the Panthers, and the result was never going to be in doubt. And the Roosters are, riddled with injury at the moment, but I think they do have Jared Warrior-Hargreaves coming back this weekend for the game against who they're playing. Not North Queensland. No, they're playing Manly, aren't they, this weekend? So hopefully they'll be a lot better than they were this weekend. But Penrith were far too good for them at the weekend. And, I mean, it does look, doesn't it, to be a competition between Melbourne and Penrith. I mean, Melbourne hammered the Sharks at Amy Park in Melbourne at the weekend.
37-10.
That score was 37-10, yeah.
Harry Grant scored 3 tries in that one.
Yeah, your old schoolmate, Harry Grant. Yeah, absolutely.
No, he's absolutely killing it down there.
He certainly is. Yeah. You ought to keep in touch with them and get some free tickets for the grand final.
Oh yeah, it'd be great.
Yeah.
But yeah, we also had Cowboys defeating the Knights, 28 points to 16.
The thing that was interesting about the NRL finals this weekend was how much more exciting the knockout games were. The game between 5 and 8, which was Cowboys and Knights, and between 6 and 7, which was Bulldogs and Sea Eagles. Those games were thrillers, and North Queensland scored 2 late tries to snatch it against Newcastle, and Manly scored late on to frustrate the Bulldogs in front of 50,000 people at Accor Stadium. So it's Manly who will go forward to play the Roosters on Saturday at Alliance Stadium, and the Cowboys who will come down to Sydney to play the Sharks on Friday night, also at Alliance Stadium. But they've got a problem, haven't they? They might not even get there, Jake.
That's right. Apparently the Cowboys haven't booked tickets in time, and the I guess the couple of flights that are going to towns on the day they wish to leave are pretty much fully booked, so they've had to reach out to the NRL to see if there's some sort of chartered flight maybe they could organise.
Yes. Well, they ought to. I mean, well, they've got to, haven't they? Really, because you can't have a NRL semi-final stymied by the fact that one team can't get there.
Yeah,
I mean that would be amazing, wouldn't it?
Well, that's it.
So they've obviously got to sort it out, and no doubt they will lay on a charter flight for them. But that should have been thought of quite a long time ago.
Yeah, it's tough to plan for, isn't it? And
well, it is. But the thing is, you know perfectly well that the Cowboys, A, they didn't know whether they were going to beat Newcastle, and B, they couldn't have known, I don't suppose at the time, whether they'd be playing in Sydney or in Melbourne or wherever it might be. So it's difficult to book tickets when you're not quite certain that you're going to be going somewhere. So the obvious solution is to have a charter flight ready to operate for them wherever they might be going.
Or Peter Valendi's might have to get onto the phone to the CEO of Qantas maybe, or Virgin, and say, hey, can you help us out?
Whoever,
yeah. Because as we touched on before the podcast, the amount of chartered flights they organised during the COVID period, I'm sure they'll be able to organise.
It wasn't a problem then, and it shouldn't be now.
Yeah, that's right. Now, I guess, we also had some League One action over the weekend as well.
You were at Rochdale, weren't you?
Yeah, mate.
Reporting for League Express on an exciting game between Rochdale Hornets and Hunslet, and in the qualifying playoff, 30 points to 18, Rochdale won.
Yeah.
What was your impression?
No, I really enjoyed it. It was a rainy day at Rochdale. It seemed to be that sort of misty rain that just sort of falls in. It wasn't very heavy, but enough to make the ball really slippery. And I think Rochdale had quite a slow start to the game. I think Hunslet scored 2 tries from the jump, basically, and that sort of worried the home fans a little bit. But it was a great physical match, and Rochdale fought their way back into it. They had a lot of luck out wide, and there was some fireworks in the 80th minute, mate. Basically, the match sort of ended. A Hunslet player was tackled over the sidelines in quite a rough fashion, you might say, and a good old-fashioned push and shove sort of followed.
Were any punches thrown?
Oh, I think there might have been. It was really hard to tell from where I was sitting, and it might be a good thing that game, wasn't filmed or recorded just for judiciary purposes.
Yeah. Mind you, I'm sure somebody would have been filming it for the club, so they won't escape scot-free, will they? Probably.
Yeah, probably. But
you weren't tempted to go and join in the melee.
No. I was standing right back. I didn't want to get my hair wet, mate. You might say. But there was a small contingent of Hunslet fans that were very vocal. They were singing songs all match, which was great to hear. And I think a few of those were keen to get involved in the brawl, but they were sort of stopped by a fence. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens, because right in the 80th minute, there was 2 Rochdale players. One was given a red card, the other was given a yellow card, and Hunslet also had a yellow card given as well. So
let me ask you 2 things about the game. What did you think about the quality, the skill quality, the competitiveness of the game and so on? Because it's 2 levels below Super League, isn't it?
Yeah.
So how did you rate it?
No, I thought it was still a very high standard. It's probably my first League One game match that I've been to, so I was quite surprised. It could just be because it was 2 playoff contending teams that are in form at the moment, but I thought it was still a very high standard, and you can see there is potential for players maybe looking to get a shot, in terms of gaining attention from Super League sides. It's a good base for them to sort of showcase their ability.
Absolutely, yeah.
I sort of liken it to, I guess, Queensland Cup, even like the local A grade level in Brisbane. It's quite a strong competition.
Yeah.
Same in Sydney. But yeah, very, very good standard.
Yeah. And what about the atmosphere of the game? Was it a vibrant atmosphere, did you think?
I think there was about around 800 to 900
826
fans.
for the official crowd.
And they sort of all were sitting in that one stand where I guess the dressing sheds are, and it felt quite full. But yeah, with the Hunslet fans singing all match, it felt almost like you're at a Super League match, with how vocal they were.
Great.
But yeah, no, it was an enjoyable match, and I'm keen to see how they go for the rest of the year.
Absolutely. And what do you think of the stadium, the Spotland Stadium?
Yeah, it was
the Crown Royal Arena, I think it's called now, isn't it?
You might say it was a little bit more intimate. A little bit smaller than some of the Super League stadiums we've been at, but I think it's still a great facility for a team at that level to have that. And the pitch was in perfect condition, considering it had been raining all day, and it held up really well. But yeah, you almost felt like you're a bit closer to the players.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it was a nice sort of interaction there between the fans and the players at the end of the match. Obviously, after the brawl sort of calmed down a bit, but no, it was a good match. And then the other match, Midlands, 24...
Birmingham-based Midlands, beating Warrington 24-22.
Gee, another close one.
What a fine result for Midlands Hurricanes.
Yeah.
That was their first ever playoff game, and they pulled it off, just held off Workington Town. So they will now travel to Hunslet this coming weekend on Sunday. So
and
that's
then
going to be an interesting one.
Rochdale will play Keighley, won't they?
Yeah,
I think so.
They will, yes, at Keighley.
Yes. So that'll be 2 very good matchups. Yeah. see what I'm doing, mate.
I'll tell you what, the other thing that's just worth mentioning, we were talking about the NRL and I forgot to mention it, but playing for Manly was Luke Brooks. And I think he's played, I believe, something like 240 NRL games for West Tigers. And playing for Manly against Canterbury, it was his first ever playoff game, which is a remarkable fact, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
He's never played in the playoffs before. And, had a good game, I thought, and good luck to him, and, we'll see whether they can go all the way.
Yeah, I'm so happy for him because, the amount of times the media labelled him, and he was sort of the scapegoat for a lot of West Tigers failures.
I don't know why. I mean, he's a very good player.
Yeah.
And he's showing it with Manly and helped them to get into the playoffs this year. Plays well alongside Daly Cherry Evans. So why the criticism?
Yeah. It'd be bittersweet to see them go deep into the finals, and who knows, they could upset any team on their day.
They could. But yeah,
they looked really good on the weekend. Now we will just quickly preview some matches this weekend, mate. Unless there's any other news items you want to touch on.
Well, I was just going to mention the readers' poll in League Express this week, which you can access via our website, totalrl.com. Last week we said of all the NRL players included in Sean Wayne's England squad, which will have the biggest impact in the series against Samoa?
Yep.
And the winner is Herbie Farnworth, 34.78%, followed by Dominic Young, 22.36%, and then Victor Radley with 14.6%. So that's what the readers are expecting. Quite surprised to see Morgan Smithies coming at the bottom of that six-man poll with only 6.83%. But this week's readers' poll is another England-related one. We're asking which player, who's the unluckiest player not to have been included in Sean Wayne's 31-man England squad. And the choices are Dean Hadley of Hull KR, who I think's been outstanding for the latter part of the season, Toby King of Warrington, who picked up a couple of Albert Goldthorpe points at the weekend, Matty Nicholson of Warrington, who was in the England squad that played in France mid-season, and then three Salford players. Salford haven't got a single player in the England 31-man squad, and that sort of obviously is a bit annoying for them, I think. Although in another sense they're not too unhappy because the players can get a decent off-season. But we've got Oliver Partington, who's been outstanding for them, Mark Sneed, who obviously has been outstanding, and Callum Watkins, who's also played very well for them this year. And then the final player is Mark Percival of St Helens, who's not in the England squad for some reason. So, an interesting choice of players there who you can pick to be the unluckiest guy who's not in the squad.
It's, in a way, it's great to say that there's this many players contending for an England side, which means it'll be a very strong side.
Well, let's hope so, yeah.
But what's Sean Wayne's gripe with Salford, do you think, mate?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? He's never really liked Mark Sneed. I think we've talked about this before. But, in the World Cup in 2022, Mark Sneed played against, I think it was Greece, if I remember rightly. Didn't play in the big games against Samoa and so on. And as I've said before, I think if Mark Sneed had played in that semi-final against Samoa, England would have won it because he would have kicked the field goal before Samoa did, in my view. But, that's speculation on my part. People can disagree with me if they want, but, I think it, he would have controlled that game in a way that it wasn't controlled.
Yeah, he's got the most accurate beat in the competition. He knows how to knock over a field goal.
He's got the best kicking game. He can do anything. With a ball on his boot, he can do absolutely anything. Yep.
All right, mate, we'll take a quick preview or a look at this weekend's NRL matches. We'll start with the finals. We've got Cronulla taking on the Cowboys in the first matchup. Who do you like in this one?
Well, I think I'd go for the Cowboys, actually. The Cowboys had a tough game against the Knights, and Cronulla got hammered by Melbourne. It's being played at Alliance Stadium rather than at their own PointsBet Stadium. I think the Cowboys might just be a bit too strong for them, and it'll be a tight one though, and it's a knockout now, of course. So and it's going to be interesting. Cronulla wanted to play this game at home at their own stadium, but it only holds 13,500, so they're not being given that right to hold it there. It'll be interesting to see what sort of crowd turns up at Alliance Stadium on Friday night, because it's going up against a Sydney Swans AFL game at the Sydney Cricket Ground, and so it's going to be very busy around that Moore Park precinct, I think. But I think, as I say, I just fancy the Cowboys to come down, assuming they can get down to Sydney, to come down to Sydney and put one over them.
There's a lot of pressure riding on Cronulla. Obviously, they've come under a lot of criticism for going out in straight sets the last couple of years in the finals.
That's right. They often do that, don't they?
And they're in danger of doing it again this year if they can't win against the Cowboys. So, a lot of pressure on Nico Hines and Craig Fitzgibbon as well.
Some people saying Nico Hines should be dropped. He's not as effective as he should be. I like Nico Hines, so I hope he really plays and has a blinder and proves me wrong, and Cronulla go through.
No, I hope so too. And the other matchup, we have Roosters taking on the Manly Sea Eagles.
Well, that's an interesting one because the Roosters, as I say, are still without some key players. Sam Walker, I think, is the biggest loss probably, but and Manly had a great win against the Bulldogs, and I think Daly Cherry Evans is playing well. Luke Brooks is playing well. Their pack is playing well. They've got the Trebojevic brothers all playing well too. Again, it could potentially be a shock result, I think, and we could see Manly and North Queensland going through as the lowest placed teams this weekend. It wouldn't surprise me, especially when the Roosters are bringing back Warrior Hargreaves, but. Will that be enough? I'm not quite so sure.
Yeah, we sort of touched on it a little bit before the podcast. It's unlucky for the Roosters because their chances going into the final series were, cut in half almost when they lost Sam Walker,
Absolutely.
Brandon Smith, Victor Radley. So, we'll see. Anything can happen. But we'll move into Super League matchups. Obviously, the final round of the regular season. I can't believe it's finally upon us, mate.
Neither can I, no.
It's gone by so quickly. But we have 2 matches on Thursday night, which will be good to see. We've got Huddersfield taking on Castleford.
Well, this is a pretty meaningless game in the sense that, whatever happens, Huddersfield will be 9th and Castleford will be 10th. And, there's not going to be a massive amount of interest in it, unfortunately. So it's a case of both teams probably putting out youngish sides and, maybe looking ahead to next year, preparing for next year at this stage.
Yeah, and it's a great opportunity. If there is any players in the squads that haven't had a chance to debut yet, give them their debut jersey for all their hard work. But I can't imagine. I'm sure every squad's probably used most of their players this year. The other matchup, Wigan taking on Salford.
Well, Wigan storming ahead. I think they'll be too strong for Salford. I think they'll win the League Leaders' Shield, and I think Salford will, as a result of that, finish 4th or 5th in the league. And the interesting thing is to see who they'll play in the first round of the playoffs.
And on Friday we have Hull KR taking on Leeds.
Hull KR are now going to be without Elliot Minchella, but you still can't see them losing against Leeds, can you?
No,
to be honest.
And in the other we got 2 other matchups on Friday: Leigh versus St Helens.
Well, a week ago I thought Leigh would beat Hull KR, but now I'm a bit more doubtful. Maybe they've got a form slump at the end of the season, and I think St Helens are on the way back. And I think they might just be a bit too strong for Leigh this weekend. Leigh
do welcome back Edwin Apape, I believe.
Yes.
Missed, the last 2 weeks.
Well, that's going to be quite important for them, isn't it? So, it's a toss-up this game, but I think Saints might just sneak it.
Yep. Then we have Warrington taking on London.
Well, you've got to go for Warrington. The question is how many they will win by. Hopefully not that many from London's point of view, and London will be able to avoid finishing in bottom place, which would be... In some senses, in all senses, very embarrassing for Hull, who play the following day, don't they, against Catalans.
Do you think Sam will look to rest his men, or do you think he'll be pushing for a top 2 spot?
No, I think he'll be pushing for a top 2 spot.
Yep.
No, absolutely.
And then the final matchup of the round, we have Hull FC taking on Catalans.
Well, Catalans haven't been playing well. They've been really struggling, but you suspect they're still too strong for Hull. So... you would imagine, that they would win it, but they will go into that game knowing what they need to do if they've still got a chance of winning, of getting a place in the top 6. If Leigh have lost to St Helens and Leeds have lost to Hull KR, then a win for Catalans would get them into the top 6, and that would be a massive incentive for them, wouldn't it? On the other hand, if Leeds have beaten Hull KR or Leigh have beaten St Helens, then they've got no chance really. So that it wouldn't matter so much. So who knows what situation is going to be facing them in that game? Yeah,
there'll be a few anxious players watching the results of other matches to see what is going to happen with their situation. But yeah, can't wait for it. It's going to be a really good weekend and an exciting one for all fans.
Absolutely.
But all right, mate, we might wrap it up here if you're happy with everything we've covered. We will remind our viewers and listeners, if you do want to grab your subscription.
Before we finish, we've talked about the League One playoffs already. So I'm going to ask you, as a man now who's got experience in watching League One, Keighley versus Rochdale. Who's going to win?
Keighley, I'm going to say.
You'd think so.
I spoke to a few people at the ground and they thought it was going to be a tough ask for Rochdale to play off against Keighley, but...
Well, you never know. And Hunslet versus Midlands Hurricanes. Can the Hurricanes come up to Hunslet and put one over them?
I mean,
those Hunslet fans wouldn't think so, would they? But
no, I'd like to see Hunslet play in dry conditions. I mean, I'm not sure what the weather forecast is this weekend, but I mean, they matched it with Rochdale for a good chunk of the game the other day, and never quite looked like they were out of the match. So I think they might bounce back this weekend, mate. But yeah, I haven't watched any of Midlands matches this year, you might say. So
no,
I don't know what to expect from them.
They're a team on the rise, so you never know if they, if they can put one over Hunslet this weekend. It'll be a great thing for them, and hopefully give them a higher profile in Birmingham where they play.
Well, I'm happy to be proven wrong, that's for sure.
Okay.
But yeah, all right, mate. We'll remind our viewers and listeners, if you do want to grab your copy of League Express online, you can head along to totalrl.com/shop or scan the QR code across the screen there. And yeah, mate, we might wrap it up and do it again next week.
Been a pleasure, Jake, as always.
Yeah, you too, mate. And yeah, see you next week, hey?
Okay, thanks mate.